Kai Köhne from Digia, or indeed the Qt company as I should be calling it, talking to you about the logging frameworks in Qt and especially about Qdebug. He's going to take questions during the talk, but I'm not going to try and get you with the microphone, so give him time to say your question back for the microphone, and at the end we'll do questions as normal. So please give a round of applause for Kai.
So thanks. Yes, first of all, it's wonderful that so many people are here. I was a bit worried because it's, I mean, I guess a lot of people might think it's kind of, you know, logging pretty boring. And honestly, I mean, there won't be any kittens. And I don't have OpenGL demos and so on, but I think it's a very interesting topic just because it's, I mean, everybody's using logging, right? Maybe not the Qdebug framework, but a lot of you will use it. And it's that thing that you use daily when debugging things and trying to find out what's wrong. And there's this common meme that, like, the difference between a good programmer and an excellent programmer is often enough that the excellent one knows its tools right. And so this is what it's about, like knowing really a bit about the internals. So we will talk about Qdebug and friends, also other stuff, and you will. I hope, or my promise would be that for those of you who are actually programming and using that stuff, that you will learn something that is worthwhile to remember after this talk. So let's see how it goes. Just very shortly about me. What? What's wrong? The Qt company, right? So yeah, I'm Kai Köhne. I live actually here in Berlin. Have been working for various companies now.
Without changing offices?
Without changing office. Well, we changed office once, but that's something different. And since 7 years, I think. And yeah, I mean, during that time I have done a lot of very different stuff. So I was pretty heavily involved in Qt Creator at one point, also the Quick Designer and the debugging. Then since 5.0, or in the start of 5.0, I spent some time with the MinGW things, so the binaries for that. Packaging in general is right now what I spend my time on. So the installer framework, the Qt installer, and that kind of stuff. But also, I think right before 5.0, I also had became interested into the logging facilities that we have in Qt-based, just because I had, you know, my own problems with it. And yeah, it's kind of a side project of mine. So I'm by far not the only one working in that area. So we get lots of contributions from different persons, actually. So it's a very good example of the Qt community, where everybody, you know, has their specific needs and sees the problems and just contributes. So what we will talk about is like, well, how do I generate logging messages? How do I use them? We will also go a bit into the details about this one. Then we will have a look at the new feature which was introduced in Qt 5.2. So it's, yeah. It got extended in Qt 5.3 a bit, which is called Categorized logging, and we will have a look there. Then we will kind of move to the backend. So now that you have your logging messages, what can you actually do with them? How to format them, so on your console, and what logging backends are there actually? So where does that stuff actually end up? And also how to write your own backend. But let's start very slowly. So this is kind of the minimal, yeah, well, the most basic thing you can do. And I was told that will compile even with Qt 1. So I haven't tried, but someone who was involved in Qt 1 told me. So it's like, yeah, hasn't really changed. So what you see here is that we can generate logging messages, and we have 4 different levels, which are kind of have semantics. So debug is for like debugging messages. Then we have warnings. We have critical stuff, which is a kind of a strong warning. And then we have fatal stuff. And QFatal has a specific semantic in that that will be the last one thing printed from your application, because after that it will assert or show the Windows errors message box or something.
Windows you can click continue.
Yeah, but right, and you can start debugging, but yeah, exactly. Well, maybe that's a question. What do you think will happen with the QDebug statement when you do a release build of your application? Any guesses? Or does someone know for sure? So the answer is it will just print it. And that's a common misunderstanding that even old-time Qt developers are missing this. So QDebug it's the name, it's kind of naming confusion. So there are debug and release build. So you think a QDebug message is something specific to a debug build, but that's not true. Maybe it was at some time. So I have a colleague of mine who strongly insists that it might have been different in the past, but I don't know about that. So yeah, I said in the beginning that this is kind of very basic stuff, and it hasn't changed syntactically since Qt 1, but actually in the something happened with 5.0, and that is that there are no QDebug, Q1, QCritical, and QFatal methods anymore. And instead, these are macros, which you will notice when you do kind of have a compiler because you mistyped or something. Because, yeah, it won't complain about the method names anymore. Instead, it will say something about QMessageLogger. And, well, that's how the QDebug definition looks like right now. So it's actually calling a constructor of the QMessageLogger class, which keeps the file line and function information so that we can have that at metadata to the actual message. So actually, yeah, I mean, file line and function info are macros if you don't know them, and that will allow you to say not only you know that the program tells me something's wrong, but it will also tell you something's wrong and this message was logged in main.cpp line whatever. We see later how to print that actually. So yeah, so we can, I mean, the example shows we can print strings, and that we also have another way of writing that, but this way of using the macros is actually called the printf style, which, because it kind of behaves like printf, but not exactly. And actually I want to do that in kind of showing you, together with you, discovering what that means. So, so let's start with something very basic. You have a const char. Oh, damn it. Yeah. And it's defined to someone. So if you write printf, you would, oh, damn it, sorry. You would write it like that, right? Actually, you would probably write it with \n, which QDebug adds automatically. And if you type that with QDebug, well, no difference. You would probably do the very same. Now it gets a bit more interesting. Like, if you have a QString, how would you print that with printf? Any guesses? Pardon? You can do that, right? So you could pipe it through a standard string, but usually you wouldn't do that because it's kind of expensive. What you do, you would probably write something like that. So that's at least what Stack Overflow will tell you. And what QPrintable is just a glorified version of to local 8-bit sorry, const. So printf doesn't know about qstring, so what we do is we convert it first into a local 8-bit, which is, usually UTF-8 on Unix and something else on Windows, as we learned, and take the pointer out of this qbyte array, which Q2 local 8-bit const creates. And actually, you can do the very same qdebug. I won't bother typing this. Damn it. I get so confused with this Mac. But it's actually a bit ugly thinking about it, because I won't bother showing you, but in the qdebug, in the qmessage logger, so in the implementation, what it will do is converting that right back to a qstring. So we are kind of doing unnecessary conversions there. But the real fun starts if you're trying to print a standard wide string. Anybody try to print that with printf? I can tell you that there is a long string which you can use. And now you might think, well, pardon?
2C string.
Ah, right. Something like that. You might think, well, let's hope that this behaves the same, right? And it will actually work on Windows. Not on Unix, because the qstring, so what qstring actually does, it claims to be printf, but it doesn't use the system printf. So the compiler, it tells it's printf, but actually we have our own printf implementation in qstring, and there we just say ls is documented to be always UTF-16 actually. And wide string happens to be UTF-16 on Windows, but on most Unixes it's actually a 32-bit. So that's pretty ugly. And I won't bother typing now how the real thing would look like in, where is my mouse? So how you would print a standard wide string, and maybe there is a better method, but I think that's the canonical one, is you would take it, convert it to a qstring, then convert it to a qbyte array of 8-bit, then take the const pointer out of it, pass that to qdebug, and qdebug will convert it back to a qstring. And I hope you agree with me that that should send shivers down your spine, because it's so ugly and so unnecessary. And yeah. So why all that mess? I mean, I already mentioned it. Like to the compiler, we claim that this is system printf. So the compiler will actually warn you about using %ls with anything else than a reachrt. But internally, we aren't using system printf, so, but this helper method, which is actually documented to be not deprecated, but you shouldn't use it in new code anymore. So now it's kind of one of the dark corners of qstring that we still have that. Now, is that it? Can't we just print a qstring without, converting back and forth? And the answer is, of course, we can. And that's the other syntax that we have for generating messages. I call it stream logging. Sometimes it's called QDebug, because there is a QDebug class involved stream logging. And that's kind of the IO stream style. So you don't use printf anymore. You use you just pipe your stuff into the sink, and it will just magically be printed. And actually, you can do that with all kind of stuff. So you can just print literals, but you can also just print a date or qrect or even a variant if it happens to be a type internally that you can print. Or you can just print a qlist. that will just, magically appear. So that's very nice. No more like ugly conversions and formatting and so on. And in general, that's also the style I recommend. There is one odd thing, though, which a lot of people run into, and that's as we add, the formatting does some convenience stuff. First of all, it adds a space between every argument. And the second one, which a lot of people complain about, is that it will put not literals, but QString and Q, by the way, into parentheses, in quotes. So if you just print hello name, and name happens to be a QString, there is a hello, a space, which you didn't add actually, and the world is then printed also in quotes. And I mean, for that kind of things, it's actually okay, but often enough people just want to control the formatting and don't want to have the quotes or don't want to have the space. But there is help. So there is first of all the no space and the space method, which you can just call on the thing. And in Qt 5.4 we will also have a no quote to get rid of the quotes. So the hack, if you don't use Qt 5.4, the hack for printing a QString without quote is actually, again, doing it by converting it first to a const char. But as we said, that's ugly because it will just be converted back, and you have to actually wonder about the encoding and that kind of stuff. So there are kind of common patterns that you want to use. One is sometimes you want to print a bit more, and you don't want to have a long line, or you want to do a for loop. And what QDebug actually returns, or the QMessage logger, which it really is, returns, is an instance of the QDebug class. And what happens is that in the destructor of the debug class, the message is actually only flushed to the system. So what you can do is you can save that into a temporary, use that, or into a variable, use that, just conveniently apply everything, pipe, as long as you like, maybe even call a method that just does the formatting, and then if QDebug of the dbg variable goes out of scope, then it will be flushed. So that's one trick. The other little known fact is actually that that QDebug also accepts the QText stream manipulators. So if you don't know about them, they have lots of formatting hints. So you can say that, for instance, here that all numbers should be in hex instead of decimal, or that the hex numbers should be all uppercase, the digits, and a couple of other things too. So that's pretty handy if you want to really do like number formatting, where usually people then again resort to printf, but it's not really necessary. Yes. Can you force the flush? Yes. I don't think so. You have to destroy. I think you can only flush it in the destructor. So there is actually, you could write flush here, because QTextstream accepts a flush, but that doesn't result in actually the message being sent over to the backend. Actually, I mean, maybe we could create an overload for that. I don't know. But usually the advice is, if you have something, I mean, if you have something important, then just log it. Don't, try to concatenate it over a long time. That's not the idea. I mean, you shouldn't like assemble long messages here. Pardon?
Use a fake scope.
Yeah, exactly. Use a fake scope, print it, and then go on. So I already said that a lot of Qt types can be just streamed, but what if you have your own type? And let's just look at an example. So for whatever reason, you had decided to have your own color struct, and it's everywhere in your application, and you just want to pipe it from time to time without having to format it explicitly. So the way you do that is you define an operator, streaming operator, which returns a QDebug, takes the QDebug as an argument, and as a second argument takes the struct. And that part is kind of as you expect. So you just format your stuff, set the right formatting options, and then pipe your data. But for these kind of stuff, it's actually a bit tricky because, as you see, debug no space and also hex and so on, they change the formatting of the string, of the QDebug text stream. So ideally, you shouldn't, like the user might just in the very same QDebug instance then stream an int afterwards. And then it shouldn't be just printed as hex because it printed the color. So there are two ways to avoid that. You could of course just save everything and then reset it, but there is also QDebug state saver since Qt 5.1, which does exactly this. So it saves the stream formatting state, and on destruction it resets everything. It also takes care of this potential space that you might want to add in the end. I said that QDebug by default adds spaces, but in between, but that's kind of the job of the actual operator to do, and you can disable it, and it's a bit tricky to get this right. So QDebug state saver just takes care of that, and that's the one side. So resetting it afterwards, cleaning up, and the other side is kind of to have a solid ground for your formatting. So you don't have to worry, and you always want to print it like with decimal, then it would be just stupid to force that here. So there is a QDebug reset format in Qt 5.4 which you can use. So that should be it actually about stream logging. Now, the one and only slide I have about QML, because you can also log in QML.js. Actually, and what we have adapted there is the kind of a semi-standard from Firefox originally, which is called Firebug, and they have a, I think every web browser in the last 5 years supports that, and we support it too. So you can write something like console log, console debug, info, warn, and error, and you immediately notice that this is actually like one level more than we have in Qt. And the problem is even that we can't use the qassert because console error shouldn't just crash. It prints an error and nothing more. So what we actually do here is we map both log, debug, and info to this very same type. And in the backend, you can't find out anywhere what it is actually. There are also kind of a few other helper things that you have there, and I just listed the ones that are related to logging. So you can have asserts in JS2, which isn't an assert. It also doesn't crash. It just prints a warning if it doesn't, if the assert doesn't hold. And then there are helper things like console trace, which prints your stack trace in JS. So if you have JavaScript functions, and console count, which is kind of a weird thing because it will print how often console count has been called so far with a specific argument. So it's handy if you want to find out, like, how often, for instance, a method is called, if it's 1 million times or not. All right. Now, that should be it for logging itself. There has been also always discussions what to prefer, whether you want to use the printf style or the QDebug streaming operator style. The general advice I'd give is to use the streaming operator. But it's like with printf and standard out. I showed you that printf can be kind of a bitch if you start with advanced types, but for just printing an integer, for instance, it's fine to use the printf style if you prefer that. It's actually leads usually to more compact code, so you can make an argument that if you are really under pressure and you want to have a minimal effect, that you should use the printf style, but I mean for most applications it shouldn't really matter. All right. Now something else, actually conditional logging. The QDebug and QWarnings and QCriticals are all fine and dandy, and we use them in Qt all over the place. Actually, we don't use QDebug because it's kind of banned because you don't want to have that in release builds. So QDebug, internally we use QDebug only really for debugging, and ideally the code should be compiled out or not be there in a final build, but that's up to you. Anyhow, the problem with that is, and with logging in general, is you always have both too much logging going on if you log, and not enough. So usually you want to have all nice and clean, and you know, the standard error of your application shouldn't print anything because people might be disturbed by seeing all these internals, and is that an error or not, or should I report it? On the other side, then there is a problem, and you can't just reproduce it locally, and then you just want to give some, you know, you want to have some more data from the user, what actually is going on in the system. So you end up with something like conditional logging, where you say, okay, actually, usually I don't want to have any debug output, but if I really want to have it, there must be a way to get it, even maybe in a release build at a customer side. And yeah, I mean, I guess you have run into that problem too. So what do you do? Pardon? Get-env, yeah. So you invent something like environment variables, magic environment variables, and we have them actually a lot in Qt. So you have a problem with your plugin not loading and you have no idea why, then there is something like Qt debug plugins, which you can set, and voila, suddenly you get some more information. Yeah, I mean, just look at the cheat sheet that you got, I think, in your bag about QML. There are like 20 environment variables listed for QML. Not everything is related to logging, but actually a lot. So that's kind of one ad hoc way. Then there are other ways. So the generic answer in Qt4 was actually, yeah, if you want to have something like that, well, write your own message handler. We'll come how to do that, back to how to do that in the end. But the idea is you install one central message handler where all the messages arrive, and then you, by whatever logic, decide what to print and what not. And then there is yet another option, which is a compile time switch. So at least in Qt Creator, we use that a lot. So we have kind of a const bool somewhere where you have either true or false. And yeah, depending on how you defined it, you end up with printing something or not. But that obviously requires a recompile. So it's not as good as just setting an environment variable, but it doesn't have any overhead. So yeah, just to summarize that, so there are these two magic macros which you can define, Qt no debug output and Qt no warning output. And if you define Qt no debug output, well, any QDebug will end up as a glorified no-op. So nothing will be printed at all. The good thing is also there won't be any overhead, but you can't, I mean, it's a compile time switch. Also, it's kind of hard to make that any selection. So if you're a bigger application, well, you can define it for sub-projects where to define Qt no debug or not, but still it's kind of on a module level. The other official option is filter in a message handler, which is I mean, sometimes you want to do that, but it's also somewhat complicated. We'll see later on why. And it's also expensive because all these messages will be formatted and piped through the back end to end up in your message handler, and then you throw them away 90% of the time. Right, and there is all these custom logic here. So there was definitely a need before Qt 5.0 to come up with something better there and something more canonical. We tried to get that into 5.0. Actually, I think it dates back to Qtopia days. So they had their own conditional logging framework. Then we tried to get it in 5.0. We didn't make it. Then 5.1 was more or less just cleaning up. So it just got integrated into Qt 5.2. But there it is. We introduced something like categorized logging. And the idea is very simple. First of all, you want to split all your logging messages into specific categories. So something for, something for printing, some category for your text handling, if you talk about an editor, for instance, something for file system access, so you can kind of conveniently separate them. Actually, categories can be nested. So you can have a category, and there is subcategory, and a sub-subcategory, and so on. And they are separated by dots. And these categories are just QString. Now the idea is to kind of attach category strings to every message, and then you want to have a way to enable or disable messages based on the category and on the message type. So you want to print warnings in that category and debug output and warnings in the other, something like that. That's the very simple idea. So how does that look in code? Well, first of all, we have a QLogging category object, which is kind of the handle we have in C++ for a category, but we initialize it with that string. So in the back end, it's just QTC editor, and internally, well, we need a handle, so we call it a local variable. But it's a handle, so nothing stops you from having multiple instances with the same string, and they behave the same. And then you just don't use QDebug anymore, but something called QCDebug, which C stands for category. I know that a lot of people have complained about this because it's kind of an abbreviation, and we don't like abbreviations in Qt. So couldn't that be Categorized debug or something like that? So personally, I wasn't, it wasn't like my ideal name either, but it turns out that you want to have that short. So because, you want to add lots of debug statements all over the place, and if already calling the method takes like half of your editor, then there's no space left to actually print something, and the noise ratio is just not good. So I think it's still a very good idea to call it very short, and QCDebug just was one option. Right, so originally in 5.2 we just supported this syntax with the streaming operator, but as it goes, people were complaining that they want to use the printf style, so since Qt 5.3 we actually all support that. And otherwise it behaves pretty much like QDebug. I mean, it's just a pre-check. The other thing is that usually your category won't be only in one method or even in one class. So you often have categories which just are for a module. And so you want to have something in a global space, and it's a bad idea actually to call this QLogging category like continuously, because what it does is actually in the constructor of QLogging category we have to go back to some registry to say, hey, I'm representing this, and actually if there is a change in the rules and so on, I need to be updated and so on. So there are singletons involved and so on. It's nothing to be scary of, but you don't want to have that like a million times a second. So you want to have that in some global scope, and there are two macros to allow that. QDeclare logging category, declares it, and QLogging category then defines it in a global scope. We will look at the implementation in a second, so then it will be clear why we need that. But first start actually with the implementation of QCDebug. So I hope it's not too scary, but that's what a QCDebug actually expands to. It's also macro. So back down, that should look familiar. So we still call QMessageLogger with an additional argument, which is actually the category name. And, well, return also, I mean, you don't see that, but in this case, if you call it with arguments, then it will return a QDebug object. The difference is that we now have a pre-check. So this basically says, is the category enabled? If yes, then actually return that. If not, then just skip it. So we don't do any string concatenation and so on just to throw it away afterwards. So that's pretty cheap. And the trick is, of course, category is debug enabled, which is an inline method, which should be pretty fast. In Qt 5.4, it's actually involving atomics because we want to be thread safe, and categories can be updated at runtime. So it's an atomic Boolean operation. Still, like, should be fast enough for most cases. Just a word of caution, if you don't know this syntax, that's variadic macros. And we have to use that because to allow the printf and the streaming operator style. And variadic macros is actually something that most compilers support since forever. Oh, well, not forever, but for anything that you want to compile Qt 5 with. But like it happens if you use, for instance, GCC, you can specify -unz -strict, and then it won't define it because it only became official part of the standard with C++11. So in this case, that wouldn't compile, and we have a fallback then that just doesn't use macros at all, doesn't do the pre-check, and does the logic in the back end. But that's slower. So just a word of caution, you want to probably compile with C++11, or at least with your default compiler configuration to get this optimization that it does the pre-check. Oh, and one more notice. So you might ask yourself, why don't we just use an if here? So that looks awfully complicated. I mean, we're doing a for loop, initialize the Boolean, and then in the iterator we set it to false. So it's a for loop that will only run once or not at all. So shouldn't that be an if? And the answer is you get all kinds of problems if you use if here, because you might write QCDebug inside an if. And then, you know, you have scoping issues. So the else part down there, to which if does it belong to? Okay, the fix might be easy. We could write if and then an empty else, but then there are compiler warnings kicking in saying, actually, you know, you have that if else here, and the outer one, shouldn't that also get brackets and so on? So that's kind of a neat trick to make sure that the compiler doesn't warn about nested ifs. Now I promised that we will also have a look at QLogging category macro. You remember that's the macro you should use for if you want to declare a logging category in a global scope. And I mean, that should probably look familiar to most of you. So what it is just a static singleton. So we declare, we have passed in the name, and the name in this case isn't actually an instance, but a method which returns a static instance, which, you know, the first time this method runs, this instance will be created, and then it will just return it every time you call it. All right. So that was kind of how you write your code with categorized logging, but the question is obviously, now, how do I configure it? I mean, it's pretty pointless if we couldn't set then what to log and what not for which category. So there are actually a couple of ways to get there. Well, first of all, by default, all message types in a category will be enabled. So that's pretty handy if you start writing your application and you have added QCDebug and just run it and then nothing appears. You might wonder, why shouldn't I get something? So I think that's a sensible default. However, for instance, inside Qt, we don't want to have that. So we want to have QDebug statements for Qt shouldn't be printed by default. So actually for Qt itself, we kind of hacked it in the sense that we just have a basic rule which disables it, and every category starting with Qt dot is handled differently. But that's kind of cheating, because there are other libraries outside of Qt who have the same problem. So with Qt 5.4, you also can now pass a severity level to the QLogging category constructor. We'll also work with the variating macros. And that severity level will mean that if you pass in a Qt warning message here, Qt debug messages won't be printed by default. So that's mainly useful for library writers. Then we have an odd thing called category filter, which is very low level. We will just have a look at that in a second. But I can also already tell you that usually you want to deal with textual logging rules. So category filter is kind of a low-level hook, because people might not be happy with the filter mechanism that we have, or have their own semantics and so on. So the example is it's a global hook. So you have a method with that signature, returning void, taking a logging category. You install it, and then whenever logging category is created, this method gets called, and you can enable or disable categories at your will. In this example, we just wanted to know actually which categories do we have. So we just print them and then call the old filter, and that's returned here. So you can chain them actually. Anyway, it's a global hook, so you shouldn't only use that if you have very specific needs, because we have a higher level way of defining things, and that is via textual rules. So just how do they look like? Well, they're kind of they are built up in a very simple way. So on the left side, you have some qualifiers which defines a category, maybe with wildcards, and maybe even with a specific level. And on the right side of the assignment, you just say whether they should be locked, then you say true, or whether they shouldn't be locked, then you say no, false, sorry. No would be too logical in this case. And you can have wildcards not everywhere, but at the start or at the back. So you can write something like that, which means everything should be logged from every category, all message types. You can then say further, well, actually, that shouldn't be true for categories starting with QTC dot. In this case, everything should be disabled. Well, actually, for categories which are in QTC editor, that's again not true, and you inverse that, and you can then say, actually, QDebug statements in QTC editor shouldn't be printed. These categories, you can have multiple ones of them, and they are evaluated top to bottom, and the evaluation doesn't stop if one applies. So, yeah, I won't go with you through the full thing, but you can imagine that this leads to that QTC editor warnings will be printed, while something else from QTC in another category except editor won't be printed, and everything else will be printed. So you can nest them. Now, where do these logging rules come from? Also gets a bit more complicated, but it's pretty flexible. So we have actually multiple sources. We have a Qt logging ini file, which you can just place in beside your application. The exact location is defined by the operating system. So, but I mean, you can look it up in the documentation. So it can be also in a configure directory, for instance, for you locally. And we look up this file name and look in this rule session. So that's an ini file. We look up the rule session, and there you go. If there are logging rules, we take them into account. Then there is this C++ API, which you can also use, set filter rules. Then, well, that's just a flexible way to not use that one, but a very specific file. And finally, and I guess that's what you will use most of the time, you can just define them in an environment variable. So just before you start your application, you write Qt logging rules equals star equals true, and then you get what you ask for. Everything will be printed. Why do we have all these different sources? Well, it turns out that you have very specific requests. So the QLogging category are good for if you want to have a good default for your application. Like Qt Creator could say, actually, Qt debug messages shouldn't be printed. Then you can tell your user at development time to define Qt logging rules. And you can also have these files because you are tired of setting that environment variable all the time, and so on. So it's pretty flexible. All right. That's actually about categorized logging, and I just want to recap that a bit. So it's very flexible mechanism to enable or disable messages at runtime. So the question is maybe, shouldn't that be used everywhere? Is there still a place for the old, on unconditional QDebug warnings? And also, what's the overhead? You're telling me I should put QDebug messages in your release build, which might be slow, or what's the side effect? So I think you still want to use the old syntax, and it's perfectly fine for a lot of use cases, particularly if you don't plan to commit this and spread this out. So if you have your session locally because you have a problem and it crashes and you are not sure and the debugger doesn't help you, so you start putting QDebugs everywhere in a despair attempt to try to understand what your application does. Well, it wouldn't be really helpful to use categorized logging. It's also not only might it be slower and generating a bit of overhead, but you should also be wary if you use categorized logging what you print, because it becomes part of your binary and your public interface. So it's just helpful to print the username and password of your HTTPS request or something locally because you have a problem, you want to find out why. But that shouldn't end up probably in the release build because it might be an attack vector where someone malicious places this Qt logging ini file on the user's file system, and suddenly his credentials are logged somewhere. That's not a good idea. So take it slowly. It's best to think about these Qt categorized logging for something that you really want to have properly formatted as a user, and you aren't scared that anyone else looks at it. So if that's the case, then it's perfectly fine. About the overhead, well, there is some overhead here. So you have this pre-check, not too bad, but well, it also adds a lot, some more code to your binary because remember, there is the actual calls, but also that we log the file line function information in the call, so that has to be stored somewhere by the compiler. But yeah, you should be aware of that and use it with care, but it's still a very powerful mechanism. Oh, by the way, you can combine that with the Qt no debug output, Qt no warning output macros. So if you define Qt no debug output, also QC debugs will be compiled away. All right, so let's move to the back end. Okay, I'll hurry up. Just to recap, so we have a logging entry, and that consists of a type, a category name potentially, a message tabs, and some meta information. So what to do with that? By default, what will be printed is the category, if you have a category, and the message. And this weird syntax here is a default pattern. So you can define your Qt message pattern environment variable or set it via C API, and that defines what of all these metadata is actually printed. And there is a lot you can print nowadays. So you can print the type of the app name, the time, actually on Unix also the backtrace for every single call. You can have these if qualifiers, well, and you can also embed, like if you're on Unix, you can also embed the colors for the console, for instance, that, you know, you have these escape, weird escape characters which you can use to print errors and warnings in red, for instance. Anyway, that was kind of if you print to the standard error output, and that's also the default backend which we use on a lot of environments, but there are also other systems where there is no standard error or something better. So famously, like for Windows, for instance, GUI applications don't have a standard error. You can print to it, but it will end up nowhere. So what we have been doing also already in Qt 4 is actually we print to something called the Windows debugger log, which is a global log. Then in Qt 5 we got support for QNX as logger. Then there is the Android message handler and so on. We also got support for journald in Qt 5.3, which just, journald is a part of systemd, so usually, it's primarily for kernel messages, but also for user level messages, so that might be handy. And we have some, until 5.4, we have actually some more or less complicated logic to decide what should go where. But Thiago actually tried to simplify that now with Qt 5.4. So it might happen to you that Windows messages go to Windows debugger log now, where it previously went to standard error. But we have two environment variables to actually hard force it to standard error. Finally, if that is all not what you want, and you want to print it to a file and do some crazy stuff, you can also define a global Q message handler with a specific signature. We're running a bit out of time, so I'm hurrying it up and don't want to explain everything here. But be cautious, because it must be thread safe. That might be called from several threads at the same time. Be cautious about recursion, because think about it. If you inside here call a Qt method, which then logs again, you have a nice recursion going on. We try to mitigate that if your compiler supports thread local, but on Windows it doesn't. And there is a nice way to still get the message pattern applied, which is qformat log message. Pardon?
The problem was Windows XP.
Yeah, the problem was Windows XP, but we disabled it now globally. So, the summary. I showed you a couple of additions, what we have in the logging infrastructure in Qt 5. So, there is now metadata that you can log, also format the output accordingly. We have categorized logging. We have a couple of new backends, and we have the customized mesh and output. There isn't a master plan what we do in the future. The one thing I really want to see is that one. If you work with it, you notice very quickly, I think, that QDebug and Qt warning, which are the only kind of levels you usually want to use, are not that much. So you also saw on the JavaScript part that they have lots more. So I think we will get a Qt info message soon, but with 5.5, I guess, because it's already too late. Yeah. Yeah, and I want to have a QML.js API for logging categories, but there was a lightning talk by Pepper yesterday how to do it already now. All right. Questions?
Thank you very much, Kai. Yes, questions, please. For the questions, please let me come to you so it gets recorded.
So when you log to custom facility, is there a way to map the formatting options like colors, etc.? Like if I was to log to QTextEdit, for instance, could I just map that information?
Yeah, I mean, you can log whatever information you have in here, right? I mean, if you talked about the custom message handler, you get the type, you get even QMessageLog context contains the file line function information and the message, so you can format it in a QText editor and use red for QCritical messages, something like that.
Okay. One would assume that when you call the setFilter method that you had, set category filter, whatever
yes.
it's called, that I was evaluated at that instance. You don't store the filter rules and evaluate them. That would not make much sense, probably. So can I change those at any point during the runtime, and will they have effect immediately? We have a system where you can switch on channels and switch them off from the outside with memory map file or something. Can I use that? So if I switch...
Yeah,
if I change the filter
question.
rules at one instance, when does that have an effect?
So yeah, I mean the filter rules, that one.
Is it dynamic at runtime?
I don't think you can get that. No, it's only applied when the logging category is created. So if you have something where you dynamically want to change it afterwards, I have to look it up. So with the text rules, it works. So the trick might be to set logging filter rules because, to set the textual rules, because that will force all categories to be reevaluated. And then it will be called again. Okay. I guess we can clarify that later on, but I think that should work. It's okay. I agree. It's hacky, so maybe we should do something about that.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question about the stream interface. Is that thread safe in the meaning that if I log to standard error and I have multiple threads, is the output mixed up depending what you are streaming in?
So it's thread safe, and you will always get full messages. But the order might be, of course, like indeterministic, but in that sense it's thread safe. You won't see garbage.
I think we have time for one more question. Is anybody? Okay, in that case, please give a big round of applause for Kai.